So, welcome, Shahbaz Shah. Really excited to have this conversation. And I'm excited for this for a couple of reasons. Number one is you have a fascinating business. I'll let you speak to it in a little bit more detail. But as a business,
Sure.
you officiate weddings. It's one of the things you do.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
I feel like, wow, that's a unique business. And
Mhm.
I'm excited to talk about that. And the second thing is your approach to building business in general and marketing and sales conversations. And one thing that I admire about your approach, Shabazz, is your ability to network in a way that isn't so transactional, right? And
Right.
actually,
Yeah.
when I came into the world of networking, you were one of the first people that I met and had a conversation with, and I took a lot of value from the tips and guidance that you provided in terms of how to build a really powerful network. And therefore, I'm excited for this conversation. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Really appreciate that, and what a compliment um, that I was able to impart that and have you see the real fruits of that labor, the work that I put in. So thank you for saying that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Why don't you just, Shabazz, just introduce yourself? I'll give you an
Sure.
opportunity to introduce yourself in the way that you want, the business that you have, and anything else that you think is relevant before we
Okay.
go into the quick fire questions.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, right, I'm a wedding officiant. I run an organization or business called Getting Hitched with Shabazz, and it's based here in St. Paul. In addition to that, right, I'm a full time network development manager, which is a brand new role and has just been created actually for me here at BusyWeb, and that's bizzyWeb.com. And then I'm wrapping up working as a coach at BNI. And I have that's really how we connected was through BNI, but through the work with BNI and BusyWeb, I've been able to figure out ways to really grow the business as it relates to wedding officiant work or officiating weddings, which is not an easy task. It's a simple process, but it's
Yes.
not an easy task. There's a lot of communication involved,
Uh,
and there's a lot of listening that has to happen so that people
mm.
walk away with just an amazing experience in their brain.
Mm, absolutely. Well, you're busy, lots of things on your plate. And I love
Sure.
that distinction, by the way, right? Like it's not an easy task. It's a simple process, but not an easy task, right? I feel like that's such a um that's such a great analogy for business, right? It's not complicated, but it's not
No,
easy, right? It's still
no.
hard work. And sometimes we often don't make that distinction. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
few weeks ago, we met and we went through the random theme generator, right? And
Hmm.
two themes
Hmm.
came out for you. Number one was standing out in the market. The
Hmm.
second one was selling for non-sellers. And at
Hmm.
that time, you said, oh, I feel like both of these, particularly the second one, were specifically created for me, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're not the first person that said that, to be honest, as we've kind of gone through this process. So it's got me thinking about how random is this random process. But I was
Sure.
excited for you to say that because that means that this is something you've been thinking about and will have some really good things to say about, right? At the
Yeah.
time, you were leaning towards selling for non-sellers. Is that still the case?
It is. It
Okay.
is.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. All
Yeah.
right. And I think this is an important topic, right? As business owners, we often, and a lot of the business owners that I work with, often go into business because either they have a particular skill set that they're good at, or they're passionate about something and they want to build a business around it. And yet
Hmm.
they've never had to sell before, right? And the
Right.
selling
True.
side of things can come across a little bit intimidating and can be the
Hmm.
block for them to actually building a business that's a fun side project to actually building a full-time business that actually generates them money and actually has them to create the impact that they want to create. So I'm excited to see what comes out of this conversation. I'm going to
Sure.
pose the
Yeah.
first
Thank you.
question, which is, what's the best tip you have for selling authentically without feeling like this pushy salesperson that we often think about in our minds, you know?
Yeah, the best tip I can provide for anyone is to be inquisitive, be in the inquiry of what's happening right now in the conversation in which you are taking part. Now, that could that can seem like, well, that doesn't really fit, you know,
Mm.
that's not a closing technique. No, it's not. It's an opening technique and
Mm.
it's a processing technique because being inquisitive and being in the inquiry of what's taking place right now, especially with the other person on the line, or whether it's a phone call or somebody's in front of you and you're at a networking event, what you are exhibiting is something that one of my mentors told me about, which is you're being interested.
Mm.
Anyone can be interesting. Anyone can be interesting. However, very few people are interested. And what happens when you become interested is that you not only learn in the moment about what's taking place right now, it gives you the opportunity to ask follow up questions.
Mm.
And when you can ask those follow up questions, that brings down the barriers because now somebody feels like they're talking to a person that's engaging them in a conversation for the opportunity of that conversation as opposed to simply, hi, my name is Shahbaz. I work at BusyWeb full time and you should buy HubSpot tools.
Mm.
Or thanks so much for your interest in my wedding business. Why haven't you already signed up for my services?
Mm.
Really? You still haven't signed up? Why not?
Mm. Mm.
Okay. All right. What's your objection? Oh, okay. Well, here's what I can tell you all about that objection. So it takes out that frustration and pushiness experience and puts in place rapport.
I think that's fascinating, right? This is, and I'm going to go back to the first thing that you said that this is not a closing technique, it's an opening technique, right? I've never
Mm-hmm.
heard it phrased like that. And yet it's so powerful because, yeah, as sales people, sales professionals, what are we taught, right? There's the sales 101, ABC, always be closing. And it's like, well, no, actually, always be opening, right? You're right. Have
Yeah.
open conversations up, ask open-ended questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be inquisitive about what's going on. Um, and that's really interesting. I want to come back to the second distinction of like be interested as opposed to be interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's really important as well. There's one thing that I'm curious to know though. Like I'm creating my business. I'm hungry for sales. I
Mm-hmm.
need sales maybe, right?
Yes.
And it's like, all right, I'm having this conversation and it feels like, listen, I'm at a networking event. It's not going anywhere. Hey, the person I'm speaking to is already married. They don't need my services, right? Hopefully they're
Sure.
going to be married for a long time. Like, what's
Right.
the point of staying in that conversation? How about I just move on to the next person? Surely sales is a numbers game, Shabazz, right? Like the more
Mm.
people I speak to, the more likely I'm about to get a sale.
Well, you know what? Sales does have a numbers game element to it. It
Mm,
absolutely does, right? I have quotas at BusyWeb that I have to fulfill, whether through engagement, and I have set up my own quotas for my wedding business.
mm,
Now, yes, the person's may already be married that you're talking to. However, what you don't know is how many people are talking to them to
mm,
get insight about their wedding experience.
mm,
Great example. I had somebody, I was using one of the apps for a directory, and I had a person who used one of them also years before. And as somebody that's close to me and said, they explained to me their experience of working with this person.
mm,
And, the person did the work again, right? Simple task, get it done. The conversation ahead of that, though, um, didn't leave my friend with the experience that they had really been cared for and
mm,
valued in the conversation.
mm,
So I don't know that. I don't know the name of that officiant, and I don't need to know. I never asked. I'm not going to ask. However, just that by itself tells me that what's happening when somebody asks my friend about their wedding experience, they don't focus on the joyful elements
Mm,
necessarily.
mm,
Yes, they got married. Yes, they had a party. That was great. And their officiant was terrible.
mm,
Now, that couple that's married or that person that's married that I'm talking to in front of me right now, no, they're not my ICP. Absolutely not. However, what I don't know is their cousin, nephew, sister, brother, parent, child
yeah.
might be my ICP.
Mm,
And the selling for non-sellers focus is all about that relationship development. I have relationships, um, slightly switching, right? I get that you're in that networking room and you think your purpose is to sell in that moment. If that's your purpose, welcome to the club. That's what everybody thinks they're there for.
mm, mm,
And as a result, they collect a bunch of business cards and then they leave and they say that networking doesn't work.
mm,
Well, if we peel back the layer and we become interested, what happens in those moments are that there are possibilities that are generated that sometimes might not bloom for a while. And yeah, it feels tough. It feels rough. However, when they do bloom, they often end up being far more successful than just pounding the pavement and smiling and dialing.
mm,
Now, I do a fair amount of smiling and dialing as well. I use tools like Reddit to get engaged with some of the folks that are looking for that. I offer value added insights to different folks, whether it's from using HubSpot tools for BusyWeb or it's how to become a more effective networker through BNI. And what that's really allowed me to do is when I started working on this wedding business, I niched down drastically. I said, initially when I very first started 15 years ago, um, I said, if I don't have to drive more than an hour outside of St. Paul, I'll just marry you for free.
mm,
If I do, you got to put me up in a hotel room for one night. Now, that's adjusted a little bit over the years, depending on
mm,
who's asking for it. But in the
mm,
last year, I moved away from that and started realizing that whatever I was charging was like about 30% of what I needed to charge
mm, mm,
people.
mm,
And when I started to do that, people were listening to me differently than they were when I was simply out here asking, people directly, are, are you getting married? Right.
mm,
I had a couple who I helped them out with a part of their process. And when I had first heard about them getting married, they knew that that was work I did, but they had already had a plan in place.
yeah.
And then something changed and they were like, hey, can you help us with this part? And I said, of course I can. No problem. And so what did that allow? What did that offer was now I became a resource for what needed to happen, how it needs to happen, how to make sure it's special for them, as
Mm,
opposed to, just trying to push my product on somebody.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answered your question. I think
Yeah, and it's interesting because
moved
what
around.
I'm hearing you saying, Shabazz, is that it's like, hey, this is not like a transactional process of I'm in a room of people, virtual or in person, whatever it is, and it's like, hey, do you want to buy this? No. Do you want to buy this? No. Do you want to buy this? Yes. Okay, great. Let's shake hands, right? This is
Right.
more of a I initiate conversations, I build relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a much I'm going to say slower approach, slower and purposeful, intentional approach, right?
Yes,
And here's the
absolutely.
challenge, which I'd love to get your insights on, is that I'm talking to somebody for the purposes of business, right?
Hmm.
We have a conversation. Maybe we've been introduced, maybe it's a cold call, whatever it is. We
Sure.
have this conversation. If selling is more relationship focused, how do I continue that relationship when it is purely a business focus that I've had this conversation in? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, it does make sense. I would tell you one of the ways that you can spend time making it, I won't call it feel less businessy because it is, right?
Mm,
It is all in service
mm,
of the same goal.
mm,
But one of the ways to have it be, uh, have the experience be not only businessy and ultimately to reach that close, right, is to be able to figure out, okay, I'm either A, taking notes in my conversation, whether it's mentally or I'm actually writing stuff down on the back of a
yeah,
business card,
yeah.
right? Or I'm using my phone because I some people take notes on their phone, right?
Mm,
And they'll actually tell you that while you're networking with them. They'll say, "Look, I might seem like I'm not paying attention. I want you to know that what I'm doing is I'm actually taking notes in my phone
mm,
for our conversation so
mm,
that I can follow up later."
mm,
Now, what does that do for the person that is sharing and speaking? It lets them know that they're a person of value to you.
mm, mm,
Now, if it's all businessy, right, and you say that to them, what that's going to do is, again, that's going to leave them with the, okay, wow, this person pays attention.
mm,
This person is interested, is truly interested. I
mm,
know it sounds a little, it sounds like it can be a much slower burn, and it can be. However, when we look at it from the perspective of, is it a slower burn to a longer relationship that branches out, or is it a slower burn to nothing?
mm. Yeah.
Well, if you say that, if you say to the person, "Hey, I'm taking notes," just, you know, just in case you were wondering why I keep looking down at my phone the whole time, I am interested in what you're saying. What you're going to find are the people that aren't going to be of value typically aren't interested in just continuing to talk if they think that you're not paying attention,
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
right? They're actually going to cut it. So they're going to self-select out. Now, for the
People
people
know
that
when you're not listening. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. They absolutely know, right? And so then I think you had something years ago. You called it kind of like the red, something red rope, something. I don't remember what it was on a slide, but it was like the velvet, the velvet rope
Oh yeah,
line
the red
or red,
carpet treatment
yeah, the
with
red carpet
yeah, yeah,
people,
yeah. Wow, yeah,
right?
but good memory. I haven't used that slide for a while.
So I could totally be butchering this, but my understanding from that was recognize who those people are quickly and then move on from them,
Mm,
right? I know there's so much more to it than that, but that was what I took away from a follow up conversation with a different connection that
mm,
that a different member who was a member at the same time we were in the same group.
mm,
So, you know,
mm,
and so how does that relate to this specifically? What we are just talking about is that the people who, like you said, people know when you're not listening, right?
mm,
They know. And when they know you're not listening and they're disinterested in what you might ask next,
mm,
they are part of that group. And you can take notes on them if you want. And one of your notes might be, do not call,
mm,
right? No follow up needed. Or
mm,
it could be, wow, this person's really interested in these 5 things. I have no interest in that, and I can't help them with any of that.
mm.
However, my friend Ali can help them. My friend Joe, can take care of them.
Yeah.
My colleague Matt could be a good resource for them,
Mm.
right? So on and so forth. And what it does is just because that person isn't necessarily a great fit for you does not mean that you can't still be a value add. It just
Mm.
means that you limit the time, the interactions that you have with them
Yeah. Yeah.
going forward. Does
Absolutely.
that help clarifying a
Absolutely,
little?
absolutely.
Okay.
And I think there's two things to that, right? So the first thing is that even though they may not be a good fit for me, right, I can lift other people up. And also, when you make that introduction to Ali, for example, right? Guess what? Ali and the other person, let's say that ends up being a great business relationship, they will always remember that that happened because of Shabazz, right? And
Right.
because of that, I am going to be front of mind. Again, it feels transactional when we speak about it in this way, but it's just, it's the universal law of, and I'm going to butcher the word right now, the universal law of reciprocity, right? Like
Yes. Good
somebody
word.
does
Yeah.
something nice for me, right?
Mhm.
Naturally, when I have the opportunity, I will do something nice for them, right? It's just or I'm
Right.
more likely to do something nice for
Yes.
them, I
More
should say.
likely. More
Right.
likely. Yeah.
So it's just the way the world works. Whether that's, in business or outside of business or other types of family relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, it's just the way that the world works, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to be able to really leverage that, I would say, right? I mean, part of it's just being a decent human being, but guess what? Being a decent human being generally gives you more sales as well.
It's a weird thing. It's a weird
Yes,
thing.
yes. Let me ask you something, Shabazz.
Sure.
I hear the long game. I hear the
Yeah.
relationship building. There's another element of it is that, and as salespeople, we do need to, right, do the things that are hard, do the
Yeah.
close, right, make the
Right.
calls, do what, knock on doors, whatever my business is, right?
Sure.
And
Sure.
and for most of us, we hear, yeah, for most of us, we hear the word no more than we hear the word yes, right?
Sure.
Generally in the way the sales
Hmm.
works. Like
Yeah.
what would you have to say to those people who are just tired of hearing the word no, right? Like it's January
Mm.
now, November, people have been busy with Thanksgiving, then we've had Christmas and New Year's and like, it's just a funny time of the year for sales generally, unless you're in kind of hospitality, or whatever the time of the year that people are listening to this. But like
Hmm.
for those people who are just tired of hearing the word no, like what advice do you have to give to them?
So the first thing that comes to mind is to ask them a question.
Hmm.
Okay. So, and I'm going to ask you this question purposefully and intentionally. Okay. Are you naked right now?
No.
No, you're not. You don't have a problem hearing the word no when you say it.
Hmm.
Now ask me that question.
Are you
Same
naked
question I
right
just asked. Yeah. Okay. That's a really great question, Ollie. I'm so glad you asked that question.
now?
I'm would not classify myself as naked
Hmm.
because I'm wearing clothes right now.
Hmm.
Now, I know that seems crazy, right?
Hmm.
The idea is to get someone out of the mindset of hearing it from somewhere else and instead feeling the experience.
Hmm.
What was the experience you had when you said no just now?
Um, it was just, I don't know, I guess it was more just matter of fact. Like you asked me a question. I'm not like, no, like
Yeah,
what's the big
that's
deal
it.
here? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Hmm.
my advice is consider what question you're asking, right? Because when you asked me, I didn't directly answer you at all,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? I created almost an entire paragraph
Yeah. Yeah.
in response.
Yeah. Hmm.
And what did that leave you with?
Gave me a bit more information. It was a bit more
Mm-hmm.
gentle, I'd say, right?
Yeah, right.
Than my direct approach. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm,
Both approaches have their space.
mm,
The thing that I like to think about is when somebody says no, not right now, not here, or call me back in May,
mm,
whatever it is, or we're not quite ready to make that decision right now. And I
mm,
say, great. So does it work for me to follow up with you in 2 weeks?
mm,
And what that leaves them the room for is to say yes, to
mm,
move them back to the conversation of saying yes. Now,
mm,
if you're tired of hearing no, then I encourage you to ask yourself how many times you have to say no in a day,
mm,
because the answer might surprise you. And then, separately, that's one. Then, two, consider how many different people say no to you every day, and it becomes just part of your life, as opposed to,
mm,
I'm tired of hearing people say no.
mm,
Because when we start to put things into context and not quite put them in a box, but put them into a metaphorical space of like, oh, well, he's saying no, but what he's not telling me is anything about what could happen in the future,
mm,
right? He's not. He's just saying no. In this moment, this is what is so. Yeah, great, fantastic.
mm,
Whenever I hear no, I say, awesome. Thank you for telling me that.
mm.
Now, I didn't say that for you specifically because I was using an example.
Yeah,
However,
yeah.
when I hear no, I say, cool. I am so glad you said that. And I'm super happy to hear that you are like in my wedding business. The number of people I congratulate to get for getting married that have found another officiant,
Mm.
I, I don't even know how many. I could probably look on my phone and dig it up. But
How
the
do you not
point
take it
is,
personally, Shabazz, right? Because I think sometimes
yeah.
I would say in my career, particularly at
Hmm.
the start, right? Like it's difficult not to take it personally. I was
Hmm.
a CPA by profession and I worked in a big corporate. And at that
Okay.
time, right, it was part of our job to offer tax consultancy services. And if people said no, I was like, all right, just moved on, right? But
Yeah.
when I started my own business, I was much more personally attached to what I was selling, i.e., I was selling me, um,
Sure.
and like I can get like I can take it personally, right? Sometimes, like, how
Sure.
do you separate that?
Yeah. Great. Great question. I don't necessarily separate it as much as I get that that's what they said.
Mm,
So there is a difference between no, Ollie, I don't want to work with you because you shave your head too frequently for me to want to work with you.
mm, mm,
And me saying, thank you for the offer, Ollie. I really appreciate it. I looked over your proposal. No, I don't want to move forward at this time.
mm,
Or no, thanks.
mm,
Or doesn't work for me. Or I don't think so.
mm,
Or not right now. The only time that it had anything to actually do with you
mm,
as a human being was when I said, no, because you shave your head too often for me to work with you.
mm,
That
mm,
I am going to feel bad
mm.
because every time I sit down with you, I'm going to be thinking, gosh, why didn't I keep my head clean today?
I've never heard that put so
Right.
plainly before. Okay.
Right. But
Love it.
like, no
Yeah.
one's ever going to say that to you.
And
Right.
so when the person says, looked over your proposal, no thank you, not for me, what's my job? Should I go into objection handling mode now and give them the three reasons why actually they should? Like, how do I navigate this situation then?
Good question. So I do ask people, okay, thank you for telling me that, first of
Mm,
all. And then I ask them, like, what was it about our proposal that
mm,
turned you off?
mm,
Right? Is it a timing thing? I recently had a prospect and tell me. And I was willing to go. If you listened to the call, it was a full on, like, I tried every opportunity to like lift up that objection.
Mm,
And finally, they just told me, they said, look, man, I am not in a place where I can invest this.
mm,
I want to, and
mm,
it's not going to work right now,
mm,
plain and simple. And I said,
mm,
okay, I got that.
mm,
What do you need from me so that we can stay in communication so that we can make that a priority in the future?
mm.
Now, to answer your question more specifically, it's figure out what those objection handling items are that you're going to dig into,
Yeah.
but really listen to what they say and how they say it,
Mm,
first of all. So, did they just say no, thank you? Or did they say, your proposal's too much? Or did they say, I don't really know about this? Or did they say, we're going a different direction? Right? It's like, okay, well, if you're going in a different direction, chances are better you've already signed with somebody.
mm,
So there's low probability that I'm going to turn that around and win it.
mm.
Right? When it comes to the other objections, you can say, okay, tell me a little bit more about that. Especially when somebody says no thanks.
Mm, mm,
It's like, okay, no thanks. All right. What's no thanks?
mm,
Tell me a little bit more. And when one of the keys that I got early on in selling was when somebody said to me, oh, well, your prices are too high. And the objection handle that I got from one of my colleagues was, compared to what?
mm, mm, mm.
And then you just be quiet because they're going to tell you something. What are they going to tell you? You don't know, but they're going to tell you something. And that's going to either help you figure out, okay, well, what is the real actual objection? Because it's almost never time and it's almost never money.
It's almost never time and it's almost never money. And yet, that's probably two of the most common things that you hear, right? Particularly for
Hmm.
those in service-based businesses. Uh, so what is it usually?
It comes down to value, man.
Yeah.
They don't see your value,
Mm,
period. End of discussion.
it comes
Do you know
down
I
to
had
value.
I had a woman come to me. She only picked me
Hmm.
to officiate her wedding to her partner, and they had some qualifications on there. And I said, "Yeah, I can certainly handle that." Do you know when I opened the call with them, I thought they were a different couple,
Okay.
and I asked them a question about incarceration because there's a different couple around the same time that approached me, and I said, "So do I have it correct that one of you is incarcerated?" And then they said, "No."
Awkward. Okay.
And I just said, "Okay, hold on, let me back up. First of all, thank you for letting me like mix that all up and
Mm,
be completely screwed up and all that."
mm,
Now, I could have let my fear take me over in that moment
mm,
and say, "Well, I guess I lost this deal,"
mm,
right?
mm,
Easily.
mm,
Instead, I tapped into just dancing with the fact that I had totally screwed that up.
mm,
And then I got curious about these people. I got curious about where they were from, why were they getting married now? What was the thing, what were the different elements about them?
mm,
And by the end of the conversation, which lasted longer than we both thought it would,
mm,
I had found out that, the One of them lived near where I had lived at one time in my life, right? The other one was quite a bit younger, but had been the person who actually found my website and material and was like, and in the directory where I'm listed, and
Mm,
they and said to me, you know, I didn't want to go with anybody else.
mm,
All of your stuff was right there for me,
mm.
and you gotta know that made me feel amazing, right?
Nice.
I had put in all the effort to
Mm,
set them up so that they could really pre-qualify me
yeah.
before they even reached out.
Yeah. I love
You
that.
know,
Yeah.
so so that um, what I mean by that, or why I share that, is sometimes the things that seem like they're the biggest missteps, screw ups, and obviously the worst opening technique possible,
Mm,
and you can still close the deal because of that curiosity,
mm,
because of that engagement.
mm.
And that was a one call close,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
Texted them, set up a time. I asked my questions. I said, "Hey, do you have these pieces of data ready? Because if you don't have them ready, guess what? That's going to be a problem."
Mm, mm,
And I do the same thing with BusyWeb, right? I dig in, get curious. It's why when I called somebody today out of the blue to them, I had emailed them a couple of weeks ago. They said, you know, what do you mean use HubSpot? And I said, oh, well, do you use it for these things? And they said, no, we don't use it for any of those things. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay, well, this is not going to go very well,
mm,
right?
mm, mm,
But what did they say instead? They said, yeah, we use it for these other things. And then I said, great. Are you working with somebody on that? How's it been? Is it successful? And then the response was, we have a project we're working on through the end of Q1, and I would love to have a deeper conversation with you in May.
mm.
And I thought, okay, that's that's the kind of conversation I want to have. Now
Yeah.
I get it, right? It's not it did it close overnight? Did it close in one conversation? No.
It
But
really
do you know what
does.
I but do you know what I did close? I closed the gap between
Mm,
some random dude calling from Minnesota to where they were, and now I am a name,
hmm,
and I have a company name attached to me, and I have a qualification called HubSpot that they can use.
mm. I love that. Let me use this opportunity to kind of just summarize what I'm hearing so far, because
Sure.
what I'm getting from this conversation and what I'm hoping others are is that actually I'm almost seeing a flipping of the script here. What I mean by
Hmm.
that is like as a business owner, as a sales professional, often the mindset is, right, how do I come across? I better come across polished. Here's my script. Here's my slide deck. Here's how I communicate my value. Here's how I'm going to put my best foot forward. And it's me, 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 right? And
Hmm.
actually, what I'm hearing from the start of this conversation, not once have you said, Shabazz, is that like, make sure you can communicate your value, which is obviously important, but like,
Sure.
make sure you use these words, make sure you speak like this, use your voice tone like that. It's been about the other person, right? Listen to what they're saying, ask questions, be interested in them, don't be just interesting for yourself. And when I put the spotlight on them, what happens is that I'm able to understand more about where they are at, more about what they need, right? And whether this is a good fit. And I think when we do that, two things happen, right? Number one is actually I can look at this a bit more objectively now, right? Because if they say no to me, hey, this is not right for me, I don't want to go ahead with your services, it's not about me now, it's about them and where they are at, number one. But number
Hmm.
two, if my client is, or if my prospect is here and I'm here, and you talked about closing this gap, the
Hmm.
analogy that comes in my mind is that we're creating this bridge, right? Creating
Yes.
this bridge where actually we can kind of meet. they're coming over to us, or it gives us permission to kind of go into their world. And
Hmm.
actually, that's where I think the best deals, the most fun happens in business, where it's
Hmm.
been an evolution of a process as opposed to, the hard sell, let's get this done, you know?
Right. Right.
Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah. That's where and that's what makes not like selling from a non-selling perspective
mm,
worth worth doing, in my opinion.
mm,
If you
mm,
focus on bringing value, yes, you have to close deals. No, I'm not trying to tell people not to do that.
yeah,
If your deals, though, are transactional simply,
mm,
the amount or the opportunity for referrals is going to drastically decrease.
mm,
Case in point, I I've worked with the team. I've worked with people
mm,
who we worked in a totally different industry together. And now that they're having some issue or query or something to do with HubSpot, they called me.
mm,
And they said, "Hey, it looks like you're a HubSpot expert. You know, how can you help me with this thing?" And 9 times out of 10, I can help. Whether
mm,
that's, hey, you need to ask the person you're working with for these particular tools,
yeah,
or B, it's here, this is what you need to do.
mm,
There's always a follow up of what else are you not getting out of this tool,
mm,
right? So
yeah,
instead of having it be a transactional support ticket, you could call it, it becomes an opportunity to open the gate of how else can we be of service,
mm, yeah,
right?
yeah,
And as it relates to my being a business leader and being a business owner, developing my wedding business, I've continued to spend that time to say to people, like I found somebody who was a dance instructor, and they said, and then I had a couple who was particularly interested, and I said, great, here's the number of that dance instructor. Now they didn't end up going with me, but that wasn't the point. The point was I got to bring something to them. And
mm.
as you mentioned
Something of
earlier,
value.
yes, something of value to
Okay.
them. And as you mentioned, right now I'm in their brain.
Mm. And let me just emphasize that because I think this is something that we um hear a lot, right? Like, hey, bring value, bring value. And often our mind goes to bringing value is like creating a lead magnet, right? Or
Mm,
posting something on social media. And even when we call it like a lead magnet, like that's not a value, right? As soon as I
no.
start calling something a lead, and not like that it's not valuable, but like we create stuff because it's almost like, I don't know, um, kind of tricking somebody to come into my world. No, genuine value is
Hmm.
not a generic thing that you've created
Right.
and putting out to. Not that that's not important. It's part of a
It is.
marketing process, but it is what
Absolutely.
it is. It's something to get people into your world. You're not
Hmm.
necessarily creating value for them. Being of value is actually, specific to them as opposed
Hmm.
to, hey, here's the generic thing that I'm putting out there on social media, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's important to note because sometimes being of value can be can turn into this buzz thing of like what I'm creating for the external world, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Or squishy. Something that's
Yeah.
squishy. Right. And the thing is, people don't like stuff that's squishy unless it's a sponge that's loaded with soap.
Love it. I love that. Excellent. I want to touch on one final point before we wrap
Sure.
up. This has been a great
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
One phrase that I've often kind of taken from you, Shabazz, was the fortune is in the follow-up. Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm not sure where you got
Yeah.
that from, but I got it from you. So I I put it down to you, right?
Yeah.
Tell
Yeah.
me, tell me more about the fortune being in the follow-up.
Mhm.
Um, Let me pause there. Tell me more about the follow-up.
Okay, sure. Well, a couple of things. I got it from a real estate agent that we both were in a group with.
Okay,
Her name is Terry, and, and certainly she wasn't the first to say it, but I got it from her. So,
great.
and I do use it all the time because I do it all the time.
Mm,
So, what does it look like on the court? It looks like you left a job and
mm,
maybe you weren't real excited working that job.
mm,
However, the people that were there were people that you cared about, people you believed in, and maybe you didn't like your team, your manager at the time, right? Now, where can you follow up to be of value to them? That's one side, okay?
mm,
Because you can quickly turn a situation that was maybe frustrating you into a into providing value and being hinged upon, thanked and appreciated for your contribution.
mm,
It's not hard. How do you do that? Well, one one way you do that is by listening for opportunities that potentially could be a fit for you. You
mm,
disqualify them, and then you realize that they're a better fit for somebody else,
mm,
right? So that's one. That's one way to follow up, because again, you're following up with that person. Now, they may never reciprocate that ever. And if you're expecting them to reciprocate it, you're already in the wrong. Your mindset is not in a place of giving,
mm,
right?
mm,
So that's where that's following up. The other place about the fortune being in the follow up is that when you reach out to a person, so let's say I reached out to you in, you know, January of last year, and I said, "Hey, Ellie, we talked a little bit about HubSpot last summer. Where do you think you are with it?" Well, again, you might say, "I'm not interested. I don't
mm,
need it. We did this other thing that's working out really well. Thank
mm,
you for your thank you for your interest." Say,
mm,
"Great. Thank you for letting me know. I'm going to make a note of that. Out of curiosity, what did you use? What are you
mm,
using?" Right?
mm,
And then you say whatever you're using. Well, now I have a reference point to say in January we would talked about XYZ.
mm,
And when I follow up in March, I might say, "Ali, first of all, how's the onboarding going for those tools? Are you using them? Have they been bringing you value?" And you might say yes or no, whatever it is. But in addition to that, I'm also going to ask you, since we talked about HubSpot, have you run into anybody else using the HubSpot tools? I'm just curious.
mm, mm,
Now it becomes about how you can be of service
mm,
and bring value to the conversation. And you
mm,
might also still say no, and that's okay. But what I can leave with you or send in a follow up email is totally get that. If you do run across anybody, here's my ask for you.
mm,
I am going to send you a document that just shares a little bit about what we can do and how we can help. And then I'm also going to send you this material
mm,
so that that person who says XYZ can help. You can be of service to them and send them over to me.
mm.
And in the meantime, I'm going to keep following up with you to see how else I can help you and put you in front of the right people that you want to talk to.
Yeah. And that's the branches, right? That's the second, third, fourth degree connections that, yes, I met somebody, may not be working out here, but actually
Mm-hmm.
they know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. And actually, these things can end up being great conversations and great business deals that can take place as well, right?
Yep. Yeah, that and I did one of my first weddings I did the wedding, and then
Mm,
not 6 months later, somebody else at the same job place
Mm,
heard that I officiated the wedding, and then her boyfriend's nephew needed an officiant,
mm,
and she knew, like, she worked with the guy who had gotten married and said, you know, what do you think, right? And he was like, oh yeah, no, he's great.
mm,
And so what did I do? I followed up with her and I said, what do you need from me,
mm,
right? And then I emailed them.
mm.
And what happens in those opportunities are that I get to stay front of mind.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
know that sounds silly, but it's really not. Because if they ask me for something unrelated to their wedding and I can be of value, you can bet that when they're at their vow renewal,
Mm,
when they're at their, um, any other activity that they're doing where they're thinking they want somebody who can do that type of work with them,
mm,
or when their friends say, hey, man, that guy was awesome. Like, we're looking at getting married.
mm.
And I just had a wedding here at the office where I office out of at Wellworth. And uh, there was a couple in the room that were not going to get married that day, but they said, we are coming to you to get married. And I was
Nice.
like, okay.
Ah, yeah. Amazing.
So, yeah.
Amazing. Good. And I'd love to add one other thing when it
Yeah.
ties in follow up, being of value, keeping front in mind. And I think sometimes the follow up doesn't even have to do with the transaction that you're talking about, right? So, for
No,
example, in your
doesn't.
world, they're talking about their wedding, and then they say, yeah, we're going to get married, and then we're thinking about getting a place over here, and all of the things like you learn
Mm-hmm.
a lot about their life. And sometimes the follow up is, hey, I remember you saying you're gonna honeymoon in Hawaii, whatever. I found this great guide to things to do in Hawaii. I thought you'd love that, right?
Yes. Right.
Or,
Right.
whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I think it comes back to being interested as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
being interesting. Sometimes what I
Yes.
do is I have a list of people that I've spoken to, and honestly, when I'm a little bit bored or I need to like drum up some conversations, I go through the list and I'm like, what did we talk about? I wonder if there's like anything that I can send them to reignite the conversation? And it's
Exactly.
so surprising at how many fun conversations or things come out of just doing that essentially?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Mm.
wild. It is
Yeah.
wild how many people are like, wait, somebody who does that? I do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's fun. Shabazz, this has been fascinating. Actually, I was going to wrap up, but I looked at one note which I made that what you were saying, and I want to touch on this actually before we wrap
Sure.
up.
Yeah.
You talked about this concept of giving.
Mm,
Tell me about
yeah.
the concept of giving as it comes to sales.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we often joke about being givers. What can I say? I'm a giver,
Mm,
right? When we
mm,
talk about bad news, or negative feedback, or challenges or complications or what have you, when I'm talking about giving, being a giver, I'm talking about being of service.
mm,
And in so much as sometimes, even when I'm being of service and giving to somebody or a situation,
mm,
that in that moment may not come back to me directly,
mm,
right? And in BNI, we talked a lot about giver's gain. Well,
mm,
and you alluded to it earlier when you said the law of reciprocity. Well, yes, there is that. As it is expanded and discussed in BNI, it's more about being a giver, and then being able to or willing to receive.
mm,
Because so often we think about the concept of giving and giving to receive,
mm, mm,
right? And if we talk about giving to receive, then it is transactional. I don't
Mm,
care how close that person is to you, it's
mm,
transactional.
mm,
When we give with the opportunity to be open to receiving,
mm,
that is where a lot of magic can show up. Because
mm,
what's left is that even if we don't end up receiving in the moment, we've opened a portal almost, you can say, right? We've
yeah.
opened a space
Yeah.
so that when the receiving happens, we're now saying, yes, please send that to me.
Mm,
And it could be, please send me that lead, right? It could be, please send me that grant that I had applied for. It could be, in my case, it could be, please send me that referral from the wedding that I officiated on Tuesday, for
mm,
example.
mm,
Um, and so being open to give without expecting to receive and rather opening a space to be able to receive
mm,
leaves us with the experience that we contributed.
mm,
And it is one thing to be a contribution because someone says thank you to you. And it's a totally different thing to be a contribution because you know that you listened for a way to be that contribution.
mm,
And the example was that I alluded to this earlier, but a company I previously worked at was a better fit for a request that came through. Now, I disqualified that request with our team directly,
mm,
purposefully, and
mm,
intentionally.
mm,
And I didn't ask anybody, should I share this with the other person?
mm,
Because I knew we couldn't help them.
mm,
And my goal, my intention for doing that was to be able to be a contribution.
mm,
And the response I received was thank you for the referral. Because they knew the only reason that I was out to do that was because I knew what they were capable of delivering. And I
yes.
knew that in this moment, they would be able to be that resource that this client needed. Now,
That's
whether they
true
close
giving,
it or
right?
not,
That's an
yeah,
opportunity you, I don't want to say lost out on, but you could have monetized that opportunity. And
right.
actually, for you to say, hey, there's a better fit out there, I think that's the true spirit of giving to both of those people, you know?
Yeah,
No.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great distinction of like giving without the expectation of receiving,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because sometimes
Yeah.
like, all right, I give, and then that means I'll get back. And then after a while, it's like, hey, I've been giving a lot over here. It's not coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And often you don't see the way in which it's coming back. And second of
Right.
all, like it doesn't often come back on your timeline, unfortunately.
No.
Right.
Nope.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Shabazz, this has been a great conversation. I feel like what this has done is really challenged some assumptions around what it means to sell, right? We've spoken about this concept of like, yes, selling is a numbers game. Yes, I need to
Mm-hmm.
have conversations. I need to close deals in order for my
Mm-hmm.
business to grow, right? And actually, long-term business growth and long-term sales is about really building relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yes.
which is not transactional, but
No.
more value based. Because when I enter into a relationship with the view to be of service, to add value to the people around me, and to give without this expectation of getting back, often, well, not often, what we see, the universal principle is that I put myself in a place to receive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm able to do that, that's what leads to sales. And that's how we can really build value in our businesses, sales for our businesses without this yucky, icky, sticky stereotype that we often have of what it means to be in sales, you know?
Right. Yep.
And that's
Yeah.
really what I'm kind of taking from this conversation, from your approach to business, and what's contributed to kind of your success and where you are so far, you know?
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate your insights. We have a way that we close out these conversations is
Hmm.
twofold. I have two more questions for you. So we've done the
Sure.
quick fire questions to start off with, right?
Yeah.
And now you get to pick a question that will go into the question bank that when I hit
Sure.
generate, somebody else may end up answering, just like you ended up answering Nancy Dotz's question. So
Sure.
do you have something that comes to mind?
Whew. So I don't, and I will, because it is something I want to contribute to this project and what you're up to. I would say that um, the question to ask is, how often do you pick up the phone?
Hmm. How often do you pick up the phone?
Hmm.
Is there any context, or are you going to leave it open?
So the context is that we as a society in many places and spaces believe that people don't pick up the phone anymore.
Mm,
And it is simply inaccurate.
mm,
And how it's demonstrated to be inaccurate is the number of telecom companies that are around are in the thousands.
mm.
Now, are they doing more than some of them doing more than just phone, you know,
Yeah,
dial phone? Sure, they are. However, the number of people doing business over the phone is still it is still significant enough.
interesting. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is you get to, is there a business theme that you would like to add into the theme generator that may lead to the second part of this conversation, which is the deep conversation?
Hmm. Hmm. I would say active listening.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. The theme of active listening in business.
The theme of active listening in business. And I think that's very apt based on the conversation that we have had today.
Hmm.
Ah,
Yeah.
excellent. Shabazz, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate your time. Can you, just to wrap up, give us some details? Anybody who's interested in either wedding officiating services, services you provide through BusyWeb, how can people get in contact with you? How can people just learn more about what you do and what you're up to?
Sure. Yeah. Best way to find me is buzzyweb.com. That's BIZZYWEB.com. Busyweb. That is a great way to get connected with me. If you are looking for HubSpot services, if you have HubSpot and you need someone to help you elevate your HubSpot tools, preferably Pro and Enterprise, I'm happy to help with that. And I can even provide some suggestions for how to maximize your starter free tools as it relates to weddings. If somebody wants to work with me, if they'd like to hire me, I have still have some weekends open in 2025. The best way to reach me for that is actually to call me 651-300-2120, or they can find me at shabazshah.net. Shahbaz Shah, as it's spelled on my screen here. Um, Remember, there's four H's in my name.
Nice. Excellent. Shabazz, this has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you very much for your time.
Likewise. Yeah, thank you.